and his oxpecker.
Here, in the icy wastes of the Antarctic, men and dogs lived totally dependent on each other until the last of the dogs were sent home in the 90s. Men have perished here when movement became impossible. Captain Scott failed in his race to the pole, largely because his rival Amundsen was using dogs and Scott was on foot. The dogs, who admittedly did not choose to be here, depend on the man for food. The relationship between man and dog is thousands of years old. In this more temperate climate, both species can survive perfectly well, but they do better working together. Sheep may not be very clever, but they are too agile for the man to catch them alone. The dog is a vital member of the team. Man and dog are a classic example of symbiosis, a relationship between two species in which each benefits. Where large numbers of species live together in mixed groups, as they do on the African savanna, there are several ways in which they cooperate, sometimes one-sidedly and sometimes in a truly symbiotic relationship. The herbivores suffer incessantly from the attentions of parasites, biting insects, which are adapted to live amongst their fur and suck their blood. A gazelle is not equipped to groom thoroughly enough to dislodge all its unwelcome passengers. It has an ally in its constant quest for an end to the itch, in the tick bird or oxpecker. An oxpecker will remove and eat all the parasites it can find, probing among the gazelle's fur with its sharp bill. The gazelle puts up with the occasional discomfort for the sake of hygiene, and the bird gains a reliable source of food. The parasites often transmit diseases, so the advantage to the gazelle is clear. At the right time of year, the bird exacts another small payment for its services, taking a supply of lining material for its nest. Elsewhere on the plains, the enemy is not parasites, but predators. A cheetah waits for migrating wildebeest herds to pass through its territory, watching for calves which it can separate from the herd. Amongst the trampling hooves, cattle egrets pounce on small animals disturbed by the passing wildebeest. The relationship is more one-sided, but the wildebeest gains something from the presence of the birds. The newborn calves are mobile from birth, but they depend on their mothers for protection, finding safety within the herd. If the cheetah could get close enough to surprise the herd, it might be able to cut off a calf and make a kill. But the birds are alert to the approach of the predator. As the cheetah comes close, they fly up, and the wildebeest too take to flight. Weavers, which build in colonies, are protected from many of the enemies of nesting birds by the structure and siting of their nests. However, one constant threat to their eggs and young is raids from tree snakes. In spite of the birds' valiant attempts to defend their nests, the snake glides inexorably on, and there can be only one outcome. The thorny branches of the acacia are no defense against such a well-adapted predator. There are weavers which have found an answer to the snake problem. Their nests are much the same as all other weaver nests in their structure and in the choice of site, but there's one crucial difference. Several species of weaver build their nests directly above those of aggressive wasps. The gain to the birds is clear. The wasps will drive away any intruder, But what the wasps get out of the deal is not so clear. One clue might come from the fact that the wasp's nest is built from paper, which they make by chewing up vegetable matter. From time to time, wasps are seen going into the birds' old nests. Perhaps they collect grass, which they can incorporate into their own nests, or maybe there are insects inside which will provide food for the wasp's young. Nobody really knows, but those weavers which have evolved to use wasps in this way seem to have little to fear from snakes. Somehow, it is relatively easy to accept a symbiotic relationship between two species of animals, but when a plant and an animal have struck an evolutionary deal, it's a bit of a strain on the imagination. The bull's horn acacia and its tribes of resident ants are a case in point. The horns which give the tree its name are swollen thorns, which have evolved to provide the ants with a home. The tree also provides the ants with food in two separate forms. Glandular structures on the twigs produce nectar, which the ants collect avidly. It's the same sugary substance which other plants produce, but made outside the flowers, specifically as ant food. On the tips of some of the leaves, small yellow fruit bodies appear. They contain fat and protein to make sure that the ants get a balanced diet. In fact, the ants need look nowhere else for food. The tree provides all their needs. So what do the ants do in return? The answer is, they protect the tree from its enemies. Leaf predators such as grasshoppers are tormented until they depart, hungry, in search of a less well-defended tree. The ants perform another service as well. They patrol the ground round their tree, felling any seedlings which happen to germinate beneath its branches, even those which have grown from the acacia's own seeds. The idea of a plant effectively paying a group of animals to do it a service is not as weird as it might seem at first. One very familiar group, the flowering plants, do it all the time. Flowers are nothing more than a colourful advertisement for a well-rewarded job. The lengths to which plants go to make their flowers distinct from each other and attractive to insects shows how important all this business is. The advertisement offers a tempting source of food in exchange for a service which is really no trouble to the flower's employees. In fact, they don't know they're doing it. Just carry a small amount of pollen to another flower, which is offering an equally refreshing and nourishing reward. There is no shortage of takers. Some insects have evolved in parallel with their favourite flowers to develop specialised apparatus for extracting the nectar. Equally, the flowers have evolved to maximise their attraction to the insects. There's a classic debate in biology to try to work out which came first, the insects or the flowers. Some flowers produce such prodigious amounts of nectar that they are clearly looking for particularly thirsty recruits. They're the ones which are pollinated by birds. Hummingbirds evolved their slender bills and their wonderfully precise hovering flight in response to the nectar on offer from certain species of plant. Also, of course, the plants compete to attract hummingbirds. In New Zealand, the clusters of heavy flowers produced by the kauai tree attract a particularly voracious client, the tui. The tui is a specialist nectar feeder with a brush-like tongue to help it gather the kauai's generous provision of food. In doing so, it pollinates the flowers with its head, so the tree's energy in producing the nectar is well spent. Nectar-eating birds have proved themselves valuable as pollinators to flowers all over the world. But it is an insect, the honeybee, which has enabled the symbiosis to be stretched 3 ways. About 150 species of human food plants depend on bees to pollinate them, as part of a billion-dollar industry worldwide. The honey which the bees produce for their own use is systematically plundered by an ungrateful parasite against which they have no defense, the human being. Humans have kept bees for upwards of 3,000 years. Before that, they used to raid wild nests in spite of the bees' angry and painful protests. But beekeepers always make sure that they leave the hive enough food to carry it through the winter. The symbiosis between plants and honeybees began to develop along with the first flowering plants. Before they appeared, there were no bees, just carnivorous wasps with no means of maintaining their colonies through periods of cold weather. The key to the development of bees was nectar, high-energy food which could be stored when it was no longer available outside the hive. Food is the main link between two groups of plants which have developed a complex symbiosis which is even older than that between flowers and insects. In the temperate rainforests of North America, huge coniferous trees depend for their successful growth on a group of tiny fungi. They grow underground, in the form of wispy tubes which wrap themselves round the tree's roots. They preserve the tree's supplies of water and collect minerals and nitrogen which the tree needs from the soil. In return, the fungi extract a little sugar from the trees, a substance which they cannot make for themselves. The result is the once vast old-growth forests, of which now only a small fragment remains on America's west coast. But there's much more to it than that. Growing underground, the fungi can't spread their spores in the air like others of their kind. They have to find a creature to do it for them, and that's where the flying squirrel comes in. Every night, the squirrels glide down to the forest floor. The fungi produce rounded fruit bodies under the ground. Human gourmets know them as truffles, and the scent and flavour of these fruits is such that the squirrels just can't get enough of them. After it is fed, the squirrel's droppings will contain truffle spores, so that the fungi are spread around the forest to where new trees are waiting for them. The other partner in this extended symbiosis is the deer mouse. It is also a truffle fan, foraging every night in the leaf litter and moss of the forest floor, in search of the strongly scented fruit bodies. The mouse and the squirrel play a part in the life of one of the northwestern forest's most endangered species, a creature which has become synonymous with the survival of the forest itself, the northern spotted owl. The owl is not a member of the Symbiotic Association. It's top of the food chain, and it eats squirrels and mice. Since it depends on the well-being of the forest to keep it supplied with food, the continuing existence of the owl is a sign that what is left of the forest is still functioning properly. It is a bird much studied and respected by North American conservationists. As its dying act, the mouse has left its last contribution to the eternal forest. On the other side of the world, in Madagascar, a similar type of sacrificial symbiosis is taking place as a mouse lemur eats a lychee. The fruit exists just so that small animals with a sweet tooth will come and eat it, and leave its seeds scattered around in places where they can give rise to new trees. Wherever there are trees to produce fruit, there will be animals to eat it and disperse the seeds. From Asia, Through Africa to South America, there are members of the monkey tribe assiduously spreading the seeds of the trees on which they depend for food. The relationship between some species of baboon and the acacia trees whose flowers they eat is harder to understand. It might be purely parasitic on the baboon's part, destroying the flowers which were intended for pollination by some other animal, or perhaps the baboon's untidy eating habits somehow assist in pollination. Whatever the answer, if the flowers evolved to attract baboons to eat them, they have been very successful. The storm shaking this tree is part of another, apparently rather violent, symbiotic association. The pods which the acacia tree produces are irresistible to elephants, and they will go to extraordinary lengths to gather them. But this very irresistibility is the means by which the tree's seeds are dispersed. Like flying squirrels dispersing truffle spores, but on a somewhat larger scale, the elephants are the best means by which the tree can get its seeds scattered round the savannah. In the mountains of Spain, brown bears perform the same function, and for the same wage, for all the berry-bearing bushes on the mountain. As autumn approaches, the bears have to boost their fat supplies to the maximum to carry them through the hungry winter. After they have enjoyed their autumnal feast, they leave piles of seeds ready to germinate in the following spring, with a ready-made supply of fertilizer. There is another realm in which symbiosis is the norm rather than the exception. A coral reef is built by little organisms which are animals, but which get much of their food from the sun. The coral animal is full of tiny plant cells, which create sugars from water and carbon dioxide by the process of photosynthesis. The energy from this alchemy is available to the coral. You might therefore say that the whole reef is built on a symbiotic relationship. Within the overall symbiosis are innumerable examples of smaller associations. The sea urchins, which are so common in the tropics, are protected by their slender spines. They are coated with mucus, which has a decidedly irritating effect on anything which is clumsy or foolhardy enough to come into sharp contact with them. The animal's jaws are impressive, but they are used for attacking nothing more aggressive than the algae which grow on the surface of the reef. Its spines are its only defense. It's a defense which can be shared by other small animals if they can infiltrate the spines. Small damselfish do just that, looking out upon a world full of hungry predators from the safety of their spiny fortress. It's usually assumed that the fish do the urchin a service too, removing parasites, or the debris which sticks to the urchin's outer case, which it can't remove for itself. Certainly, when a predator like a lionfish approaches, a little fish are secure behind their barricade. The most striking association between animals on the reef, one which is seen elsewhere in the seas of the world, is that between certain species of fish and jellyfish. The stinging tentacles which the jellyfish uses to catch and stun its prey have no effect on the fish, which use them as a shelter. For years, there has been a running controversy about how this works. Once, scientists thought the fish was physically protected by a coating of thick mucus. The latest theory is that it produces a chemical from its skin which makes the tentacles less likely to sting. This is not a one-sided relationship. Jellyfish or anemones which are kept in aquariums without fish do not prosper. Quite why is not clear. But it might be that the sheltering fish attracts others which try to attack it, and fall prey to the defending tentacles. There's a truly mysterious example of symbiosis on the desert west coast of Mauritania, where the Sahara meets the Atlantic Ocean. The people who live here can find nothing to sustain them in the desert, so naturally they look for their living in the sea. There, over the centuries, they have developed what seems to be a symbiotic relationship between mankind and dolphins. It was first reported by Portuguese explorers 500 years ago. In late November, when the mullet are shoaling, the fishermen prepare their nets. They fish by seine netting from the shore, one of the oldest forms of fishing there is. While the nets are being stretched out in an arc from the beach, some of the men beat the water with sticks. This might appear to drive the mullet away, but it actually has another effect. Dolphins appear from the open ocean. The men struggle to carry the nets into deeper water as the dolphins come ever closer. Between the dolphins and the waiting nets are the mullet. The dolphins drive the shoals of mullet inshore, and the result is that the fishermen have a bumper catch. All they have to do is to close their nets round the leaping shoals of panicky fish, fleeing from the oncoming dolphins. It works every time, but no one dare try to explain how or why. Dolphins can chase fish any time they like. They have no cause to respond to the thwacking of sticks on the water. It has been suggested that they find the panic-stricken fish easier to catch, or that they grab injured ones which escape from the nets. This gives rise to an intriguing thought. The great Austrian biologist Konrad Lorenz, in his book Man Meets Dog, developed a theory about how that symbiosis began. On the plains of Africa, jackals began to realize that if they led men to where large prey could be found, they would get a share of the feast which they could not kill for themselves. At the same time, men realized that not only were jackals good at warning them when lions were approaching, they were also better at finding prey. The result was that both species benefited. From that beginning, Lorenz suggested, came the oldest and most valuable partnership between humans and another species. Could it be that the dolphins and the fishermen of Mauritania are at the threshold of another invaluable symbiosis, which in centuries to come might be as commonplace as that between the shepherd and his dog?
More close encounters tomorrow when an oil platform accidentally provides a home for crabs, corals, sponges and fish.